Something massive is happening right now in the global auto industry. And it's not just a trend, it's a full-blown rupture. Legacy automakers are panicking, EV giants are stumbling, and behind the scenes, the entire system is being rewritten. In the next few minutes, you'll see why there's no going back, and how this moment could change what you drive forever. Don't blink. The revolution is already underway. The big names, Ford, GM, Toyota, Volkswagen, Honda, are no longer guaranteed survival. Once viewed as unshakable institutions, they're now being pulled in every direction at once. They bet big on electrification, but too late. While they were debating platforms and investing billions into battery factories, Tesla, BYD, and a wave of startups were already on the roads, gaining customers and learning at light speed. Even Tesla, once the disruptor, is now being disrupted by cheaper, faster-moving Chinese EV makers. Worse, the legacy players are bleeding money. Billions spent on electric transitions have yet to pay off, and investors are growing impatient. Ford lost over $4.7 billion on EVs in 2023. GM delayed its most anticipated electric models. Toyota is still straddling the fence between hybrids and full electrics, unsure which path secures its future. These companies built empires on internal combustion, dealer networks, and planned obsolescence. But none of those things work in the new world. If there's one country that saw the shift coming, it's China. With a long-term strategy, government support, and control over critical minerals and battery production, China positioned itself as the future epicenter of global auto manufacturing. BYD, the company most Americans had never heard of until recently, outsold Tesla in global EV deliveries by the end of 2023. Their cars are cheaper, their batteries are better, and their growth is explosive. Now, Chinese EVs are flooding international markets, prompting emergency tariffs and government interventions in Europe and the US. But the genie's out of the bottle. Western carmakers are no longer competing just with each other. They're fighting off a nationally coordinated machine with technological edge and cost superiority. Auto trade tensions refer to growing disputes between countries over vehicle imports, exports, and manufacturing practices, particularly as the global auto industry undergoes a shift toward electric vehicles, EVs. These tensions often center around tariffs, subsidies, and sourcing requirements. For instance, the United States and European Union have accused China of unfairly subsidizing its EV sector, leading to calls for protective tariffs to shield domestic automakers. Similarly, the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act has sparked friction with allies like Japan and the EU, as it restricts EV tax credits to vehicles assembled in North America. Disagreements have also surfaced within North America under the USMCA, especially over parts origin rules. These conflicts threaten to disrupt global supply chains, raise vehicle prices, and slow the rollout of cleaner automotive technologies. U.S.-China trade conflict. At the heart of this dispute is the automotive sector, where tariffs, trade barriers, and regulatory differences have become a point of contention between the two global economic giants. The U.S. first initiated tariffs on Chinese imports, including automotive parts, as part of its broader strategy to address the trade imbalance and accusations of intellectual property theft and forced technology transfers. In response, China imposed tariffs on U.S.-made vehicles and automotive components, leading to a tit-for-tat cycle of trade barriers that negatively impacted global automotive supply chains. A significant aspect of the trade tensions centers around China's growing dominance in the electric vehicle (EV) market. China has heavily subsidized its domestic EV industry, which has allowed its manufacturers to grow rapidly and become highly competitive, not just in the Chinese market, but globally. The U.S. views these subsidies as a form of unfair trade practice, as they artificially lower the cost of Chinese EVs and create a substantial competitive advantage in both the domestic and international markets. Additionally, there have been concerns in the U.S. that these subsidies lead to overproduction, which can flood foreign markets with cheap vehicles and undermine the pricing structure of established automakers. The trade war has had several ramifications for both sides. For U.S. manufacturers, the imposition of tariffs on Chinese-made automotive parts has raised production costs, particularly in the case of electric vehicles where many key components, like batteries, are sourced from China. This increases the cost for American consumers and slows down the transition to more affordable EVs. Furthermore, U.S. manufacturers looking to expand into China face a significant barrier due to retaliatory tariffs on American-made cars. The Chinese market, one of the largest car markets in the world, becomes more difficult to access for U.S. automakers, limiting their growth potential in the region. For China, the trade war has made it harder to export vehicles to the U.S., which has traditionally been one of the most lucrative markets. High tariffs imposed by the U.S. on Chinese vehicles, particularly luxury brands, and those produced by Chinese automakers like BYD and Geely, have reduced their competitiveness in the American market. However, China has continued to expand its EV sector domestically and has looked to other markets for growth, such as Europe and emerging markets. In addition to tariffs, technology and intellectual property issues are central to the trade war. The U.S. has accused China of stealing or coercing U.S. companies to share sensitive technology in exchange for access to Chinese markets. This issue extends beyond just the auto industry to broader tech sectors like telecommunications and semiconductors, where China is seeking to move up the value chain and reduce its reliance on foreign technology. The push for Chinese companies to develop their own electric vehicle technology and batteries is seen as a strategic effort to compete with American automakers, like Tesla, who have long been leaders in the EV space. The trade war also touches on regulatory differences between the two countries, especially around vehicle standards and environmental regulations. For instance, China's regulatory framework around EV incentives and environmental standards often clashes with U.S. policies, making it difficult for automakers to align production strategies across both markets. These regulatory challenges further complicate the trade relationship, as companies must navigate a patchwork of standards, tariffs, and trade restrictions. The geopolitical dimension of the trade war has also contributed to this conflict. Both the U.S. and China view leadership in the EV market as a key to their future economic strength. As both nations move toward cleaner, electric transportation, the stakes are high. China's Belt and Road Initiative, which aims to establish a global infrastructure network with China at the center, also includes the promotion of Chinese-made vehicles and technology abroad, presenting an additional challenge to U.S. manufacturers who already face stiff competition on the global stage. Ultimately, the America-China auto trade war has created a complex and evolving landscape with significant impacts on the global automotive industry. It has reshaped supply chains, led to higher costs for consumers, and intensified the race for technological and market dominance in the growing EV sector. The trade conflict remains unresolved, and as both countries continue to pursue economic and technological leadership, the automotive sector will likely remain a flashpoint in U.S.-China relations for years to come. Trade wars and protectionism. One of the most visible aspects of the crisis has been the rise of trade wars, particularly between major economies like the U.S., China, and the European Union. Tariffs on cars and auto parts, such as those imposed by the U.S. on Chinese imports or by the EU on American steel and aluminum, have led to higher production costs and disruptions in supply chains. Countries have increasingly turned to protectionist policies, aiming to shield domestic industries from foreign competition. This has hurt global automakers who rely on interconnected supply chains and the free movement of goods across borders. Supply chain disruptions. The global supply chain for vehicles and automotive parts has been severely affected, especially by the COVID-19 pandemic. Factory shutdowns, labor shortages, and logistical delays have resulted in a shortage of key components like semiconductors, which are crucial for modern vehicles. This has led to production slowdowns and vehicle shortages, with automakers unable to meet demand, especially in markets like the U.S., Europe, and Asia. The ongoing chip shortage has further exacerbated these problems, with car manufacturers forced to slow down or even halt production in some cases. Raw material shortages. As the world transitions to electric vehicles, there's been an increased demand for raw materials such as lithium, cobalt, and nickel, which are essential for EV batteries. This surge in demand has driven up prices and created supply bottlenecks, making it harder for automakers to secure the materials they need to produce electric vehicles at scale. Countries rich in these resources, such as those in Africa and South America, have become more strategically important, leading to competition for access to these raw materials. Regulatory pressure and emission standards. Stricter emissions regulations, particularly in the European Union and California, have forced automakers to accelerate their shift toward electric and low-emission vehicles. However, these regulatory shifts have caused confusion and difficulty in aligning production standards across different markets. In addition, global standards for electric vehicles, EVs, charging infrastructure, and battery recycling have been slow to emerge, creating uncertainty for manufacturers trying to comply with diverse regulations while remaining competitive. Geopolitical instability. Geopolitical tensions, such as the Russia-Ukraine conflict and rising nationalism in various countries, have added further uncertainty to the global auto trade. Sanctions, trade blockades, and energy shortages have disrupted the flow of goods and resources, impacting automakers' ability to produce and distribute vehicles. For example, the Russian invasion of Ukraine led to a halt in the supply of some critical materials like neon gas, which is used in semiconductor production, further exacerbating the global chip shortage. Shift to electric vehicles. EVs. The global shift toward electric vehicles, while a necessary response to climate change, has presented challenges for automakers. The EV market is growing rapidly, but the transition is complicated by the need for new manufacturing processes, infrastructure investments, and technological advancements. Traditional car manufacturers are under pressure to quickly pivot to electric models while competing with newer entrants like Tesla, which have a head start in the EV market. This transition is particularly challenging in regions where governments are imposing strict emission standards and pushing for faster EV adoption. Labor strikes and workforce issues. Labor issues, including strikes and protests over working conditions and wages, have also contributed to the crisis. Major auto manufacturing hubs, particularly in North America and Europe, have faced strikes that have slowed down production and exacerbated the global supply chain crisis. For example, union negotiations in the U.S. have led to production halts at key factories, while labor shortages in countries like Mexico and India have disrupted production schedules. Rising consumer prices. The combined effect of tariffs, raw material shortages, labor disruptions, and production delays has led to higher vehicle prices. Consumers are facing rising costs for both new and used cars, with many automakers passing on increased production costs to customers. This has led to decreased consumer confidence and lower sales in some markets, particularly in the U.S. and Europe, where higher interest rates have made auto loans more expensive. Automakers are struggling to adapt to the rapid pace of change, especially with the shift to EVs and the need for sustainable manufacturing practices. Those who are unable to transition quickly enough may face financial instability or forced consolidation. Additionally, traditional supply chains are being restructured as countries seek to bring production closer to home, e.g., reshoring or nearshoring efforts. Consumers face the consequences of the crisis through higher vehicle prices, longer waiting times for new cars, and fewer options in the market. This has created a more competitive and costly automotive market, particularly in developed economies. Global economies are feeling the effects, as the automotive industry is a major contributor to GDP, employment, and international trade. Slower production, higher consumer prices, and shifting market dynamics are causing economic ripple effects, particularly in regions that rely heavily on auto manufacturing, such as the U.S., Mexico, Germany, and Japan. The road ahead. The worldwide auto trade crisis is ongoing, and its resolution will require international cooperation, policy alignment, and a robust response to global challenges like supply chain resilience, sustainable resource management, and emissions reductions. Automakers will need to innovate rapidly, not only to meet changing regulatory demands, but also to navigate a highly uncertain global trade environment. The shift to electric vehicles and green technologies, while promising, also presents a new set of challenges that will require both industry leaders and governments to cooperate in creating a stable and fair global automotive marketplace. The current auto industry situation is marked by a combination of challenges and opportunities as the sector navigates rapid technological changes, economic pressures, and geopolitical tensions. Here are some of the key factors shaping the automotive landscape. The push towards electric vehicles is one of the most transformative trends in the auto industry. Governments worldwide are setting ambitious targets to reduce carbon emissions, and many have implemented stricter emissions regulations. This has accelerated the shift to EVs, with automakers committing to transition their fleets from internal combustion engines, ICE, to fully electric powertrains. However, the transition faces several obstacles: battery supply and costs. The demand for raw materials like lithium, cobalt, and nickel, which are crucial for EV batteries, is rising. This has led to price increases and supply chain disruptions. Infrastructure gaps. Charging infrastructure remains insufficient, especially in emerging markets, making it harder for consumers to adopt EVs. Competition and innovation. Traditional automakers are racing to catch up with EV leaders like Tesla, while new entrants are also vying for a share of the growing EV market. The global automotive supply chain has been heavily disrupted by factors like the COVID-19 pandemic, the chip shortage, and logistical bottlenecks. Key components like semiconductors, which are essential for modern vehicles, have been in short supply, causing automakers to reduce or halt production at various factories. These disruptions have led to delays in vehicle deliveries, lower vehicle availability, and higher costs for consumers. Manufacturers are now rethinking their global supply chains, with a growing emphasis on resiliency and localization to avoid future disruptions. Rising costs, driven by higher raw material prices, inflation, and supply chain challenges, are putting pressure on automakers. Many are passing these costs on to consumers, resulting in higher prices for both new and used cars. Additionally, interest rates have risen in many countries, making car loans more expensive. As a result, consumer purchasing power is being strained, and sales in some regions, particularly in North America and Europe, are slowing down. Geopolitical issues, including trade wars, sanctions, and conflicts, have significantly impacted the automotive industry. For example, the U.S.-China trade war has led to tariffs on automotive parts and vehicles, affecting global supply chains. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has disrupted the supply of essential materials like neon gas, used in semiconductor production, leading to further chip shortages. Brexit has created new barriers for the European auto industry, especially regarding trade and regulatory alignment. Labor challenges, including strikes, workforce shortages, and rising labor costs, are affecting automakers, particularly in regions like North America and Europe. The U.S. auto worker strike, such as those led by the United Auto Workers, has highlighted concerns over wages, benefits, and working conditions, impacting production and increasing costs for automakers. The auto industry is undergoing a significant shift in terms of technology. Autonomous driving, connectivity, and artificial intelligence, AI, are becoming integral to modern vehicles. However, these technologies require massive investments in R&D, as well as addressing regulatory challenges and consumer concerns about safety and privacy. Companies are also exploring innovations in vehicle-to-grid (V2G) technology, where electric vehicles can act as mobile power storage units, helping with energy grid stability. Stricter emissions regulations and the growing focus on sustainability are pushing automakers to adopt more eco-friendly practices. Governments around the world are imposing limits on vehicle emissions and encouraging the development of cleaner alternatives like EVs, hydrogen fuel cells, and biofuels. In addition to emissions, there is a push for more sustainable manufacturing processes and the recycling of materials, including EV batteries. Consumer preferences are shifting. There is growing interest in sustainability, with many buyers opting for more eco-friendly vehicles, including EVs and hybrids. However, price sensitivity remains a key factor, as many consumers are still concerned about the higher upfront costs of EVs. Additionally, the rise of ride-sharing services and mobility as a service, MaaS, is influencing how people think about car ownership, particularly in urban areas. The auto industry is seeing significant consolidation as automakers form alliances and merge to pool resources and expertise in EV development and autonomous driving. For example, Stellantis, the parent company of brands like Jeep, Fiat, and Chrysler, was formed through the merger of Fiat Chrysler Automobiles, FCA, and PSA Group, Peugeot Citroën. Automakers are also collaborating with tech firms to leverage expertise in AI, software, and battery technology. China has emerged as both a major producer and consumer of vehicles, particularly EVs. The Chinese government's heavy subsidies to its domestic EV manufacturers, such as BYD and NIO, have accelerated the country's dominance in the EV sector. China's Belt and Road Initiative is also creating new opportunities for Chinese automakers to expand their reach in emerging markets. Meanwhile, U.S. and European automakers are looking to strengthen their positions in the Chinese market, despite the trade tensions. The automotive industry is at a crossroads, dealing with numerous challenges ranging from supply chain disruptions to geopolitical instability. However, there are significant opportunities, especially with the global transition to electric vehicles and advances in autonomous driving technology. Automakers must navigate these shifts by focusing on sustainability, innovation, and adapting to changing consumer preferences. The road ahead will require strategic investments, global cooperation, and a strong focus on resilience and adaptability to remain competitive in a rapidly evolving market point. One of the most prominent areas of tension was Trump's trade policy, particularly his America First stance, which aimed to protect U.S. manufacturing jobs by implementing tariffs on foreign imports. The most notable trade war was with China, but Trump's administration also focused on imposing tariffs on vehicles and automotive parts from a variety of countries, including Canada, Mexico, and the European Union. Tariffs on steel and aluminum. Trump imposed 25% tariffs on steel and 10% tariffs on aluminum imported into the U.S., a move that directly impacted automakers, as these materials are crucial for vehicle manufacturing. The auto industry, reliant on steel and aluminum, faced higher production costs as a result. China tariffs. Trump's trade war with China led to tariffs on automotive parts and vehicles, including a 25% tariff on Chinese-made vehicles. While the intent was to reduce the U.S. trade deficit with China, it resulted in higher costs for automakers sourcing parts from China or trying to sell vehicles in the Chinese market. This had a particularly strong impact on U.S. automakers like Ford and General Motors, which had significant manufacturing and sales in China. NAFTA replacement. USMCA, the renegotiation of the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, into the U.S. Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, was another key focus. Under the new agreement, stricter rules on automotive part sourcing were introduced, requiring that 75% of a vehicle's parts be made in North America. This was seen as a move to bring more automotive jobs back to the U.S., but created tension with automakers that relied on more integrated global supply chains, particularly in Mexico. The trade policies created uncertainty for automakers, who operate in a global marketplace and rely on international trade for production and sales. Many automakers, such as BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and Toyota, have large manufacturing operations in the U.S., but also depend on imports from other countries. Trump's tariffs forced these companies to reconsider their supply chain strategies, and some even threatened to cut U.S. investments if trade tensions escalated. For example, BMW, which builds many of its vehicles in South Carolina, was hit hard by tariffs on steel and aluminum, and concerns over potential auto tariffs on European-made vehicles to the U.S. sparked fears of increased production costs and price hikes for consumers. Ford and General Motors faced challenges navigating the political climate, with GM closing plants and shifting production strategies, while Trump criticized the company for shifting some production overseas, calling for them to bring jobs back to the U.S.